I remember growing up in South Africa with a head full of questions that annoyed adults because they didn't have simple answers. Questions like, why can't we build better rockets? Or why can't cars run without gasoline? Or why humans accept limits that are obviously temporary if we decide they are. And I guess that was the beginning of everything, because curiosity has this way of pushing you forward even when the people around you think you're odd. So I kept learning, reading, imagining, and eventually realized I needed to be somewhere that matched the scale of my ambitions. So I went to North America with practically nothing besides stubborn belief that the future could be engineered into something far more interesting, and that's what drove me toward building companies. Not because I wanted to be a businessman, but because companies are engines for changing reality at scale. And when I started Zip2 and later PayPal, I wasn't trying to revolutionize finance or the internet. I was simply trying to solve problems that felt unnecessarily messy. But solving those gave me enough momentum to look up and ask the bigger question that had always been echoing in the back of my mind. What's the point of humanity if we never become a spacefaring civilization? Because Earth is beautiful and fragile, but it's only one chapter, and a good story needs more than a single setting. And that's how SpaceX began. Not as some polished corporate master plan, but as a ridiculous idea I couldn't let go of. An idea everyone said would fail because rockets are too expensive, too complex, too dangerous for a startup to tackle. But failure only bothers you if you let it. So we built rockets anyway, blew a few up, came close to bankruptcy, and kept going until eventually a rocket finally reached orbit, and then another and another. And that moment changed more than my life. It changed the trajectory of space exploration, because reusable rockets suddenly weren't science fiction anymore. They were real and practical and economical, and that changed the world by proving that space doesn't have to be the exclusive playground of governments with bottomless budgets. And while SpaceX was pushing upward, Tesla was pushing forward on Earth, because transportation desperately needed reinvention and electric cars weren't new, but they were ignored, dismissed, forgotten. So we rebooted the idea with better engineering, better batteries, better software, and a relentless focus on making electric vehicles not just viable, but desirable. And yes, people mocked the idea just like they mocked the rockets. But then the Roadster happened, and the Model S happened, and suddenly the auto industry realized the future wasn't going to wait for them. And Tesla's rise didn't just sell cars, it dragged the entire industry into an electric future far faster than they wanted to go. And that shift reduced emissions, redefined manufacturing, forced innovation, and showed that sustainability and performance can coexist. And while all that was happening, I couldn't ignore the silent revolution unfolding in artificial intelligence, a tool powerful enough to uplift humanity or break it depending on how we shape it. So I spoke up, invested, co-founded organizations, pushed for alignment and safety, because it's not enough to create powerful tools. We have to guide them responsibly. And somewhere in all of this came Solar City and battery storage and Neuralink and the Boring Company and Starlink, each one a response to a bottleneck that annoyed me, whether it was slow tunnels, slow internet, slow energy transitions, or the slow way humans evolve. And every project, despite critics and chaos and setbacks, was driven by the same underlying belief that the future is malleable and we are the ones who decide what shape it takes. And if my work changed the world, it wasn't because I'm special, it's because I refused to accept the default settings of civilization, refused to believe that progress should move at the speed of caution rather than the speed of imagination. And if there's any message in my story, it's that stubborn optimism combined with engineering can move planets, can rewrite industries, can ignite entire generations of innovators who will build things far greater than anything I've done. Because in the end, my goal was never to be the hero of the story. It was to help make sure humanity keeps writing new chapters, keeps pushing outward, keeps becoming something more than what we were. And the funny part is, people think changing the world requires some kind of magic, but it doesn't. It just requires deciding that the world is not finished yet, and that you're willing to work, fail, try again, and keep going until reality bends. And as the momentum kept building, people started treating me like some kind of symbol, like I had all the answers, but the truth is, most of the time, I was just navigating uncertainty at full speed, making decisions with incomplete information, trusting engineering more than ego, and reminding myself that if the goal is big enough, you will never feel fully ready. And that's okay, because progress does not wait for perfect conditions. So, while everyone kept debating whether reusable rockets were possible, or whether electric cars were practical, or whether satellite internet could work at a global scale, we were too busy actually building them to care about the arguments. And that's the thing about creating the future. You have to be willing to look ridiculous long enough for success to catch up, which is exactly what happened with Starlink. Because when we first started deploying satellites, people thought it was absurd, too expensive, too ambitious, too everything. But then the terminals started working in disaster zones and remote villages and conflict areas where communication was the difference between chaos and survival. And suddenly the world understood that connectivity is not a luxury, but a fundamental layer of civilization. And at the same time, Tesla kept expanding, building factories that looked like science fiction machines, pushing the limits of automation, redesigning manufacturing from first principles, because building the machine that builds the machine is usually the hardest part. And while all of this was happening, critics kept asking why I couldn't just stick to one industry like a normal CEO. But the universe is not normal, the challenges aren't normal, and the timeline for solving existential problems like renewable energy or multiplanetary survival is not generous. So waiting politely was never an option, and that's why I kept taking on new challenges even when people were convinced I was stretching too thin. Because the world does not improve by maintaining comfort zones. It improves when you break them. And Neuralink was one of those ideas people thought crossed some taboo boundary. But the reality is, our brains are the most powerful yet least upgraded hardware we have. And bridging biology with digital interfaces may become essential if humanity wants to keep pace with artificial intelligence instead of being left behind. So, yes, it was controversial, yes, it was difficult, but difficult things are often the only things worth doing. And as all these projects grew, so did the responsibility. Because when you lead industries that shape transportation, energy, space travel, and artificial intelligence, every decision echoes far beyond your own life, and the pressure can feel like a constant gravitational pull. But gravity is just another force you learn to work with, not against. And people always ask if I ever considered slowing down. but slowing down feels like moving backward when your mission is to help humanity become a multiplanetary species before something unexpected decides the timeline for us. And in moments when the noise of the world gets too loud, I remind myself why I started all this in the first place. Not for wealth or fame, but because we have a brief window in cosmic time to prove that intelligent life can survive, adapt, spread, and thrive beyond its home world. And if my journey has changed the world, it's only because I refuse to let pessimism be the final editor of our future. Because optimism isn't naive when it's backed by physics, hard work, and an unshakable belief that humanity is capable of more than it believes. And everything I've built, every risk I've taken, every sleepless night, and every rocket launch, and every factory, and every line of code is a piece of a larger story. A story in which humans don't simply exist on a pale blue dot, but become explorers of the stars. And if that means pushing hard, failing publicly, trying again, never accepting limits as permanent, then so be it, because the future belongs to those who build it. And as the years kept accelerating faster than my ability to process them, I realized that changing the world isn't about one breakthrough or one company or one brilliant moment. It's about building momentum, the kind that compounds across decades until suddenly everyone looks back and says everything is different now. And that's when it becomes clear that the real work isn't the inventions themselves, but the mindset shift they trigger. The collective realization that impossible is just a temporary label applied by people who haven't tried hard enough yet. And in many ways, that shift mattered more to me than any rocket landing or car milestone or satellite launch. Because once humanity starts believing it can do extraordinary things again, the entire species levels up. And I saw that happen when kids started saying they wanted to work at SpaceX or Tesla, not because of money or fame, but because they wanted to build things that matter. Things that push humanity forward instead of just maintaining the status quo and watching that new generation rise. Engineers, scientists, coders, thinkers made every failure feel worth it because the future